Okay, everybody, good morning. As we start the chitas of the day, we go to the chumash of the day. Today is the Friday, it's the sixth reading of the portion of Vayigash. Ves Yehuda, we're holding on chapter 46, verse number 28. Ves Yehuda shalach lefanav ves Yosef, and Yehuda, he sent Yehuda, Yaakov Avinu sent Yehuda in front of him, Lahedis lefanav Goshna, to direct him to Goshen. Goshen, and they came to the land of Goshen. So Rashi says, Lahedis lefanav, to clear a place for him, to show him how to settle there. Yehuda, he sent Yehuda before to make sure that he had a place to live. Lefanav, Rashi says before him. Umedish Agada, and the Medish Laharis, to their Laharis really is to teach. What did he do there? To establish for him a house of study. Yaakov Avinu wanted that when he came there, that there would be there a Beis HaNedrash, there'll be a place of learning. That when he get Beis Talmud, Shesham Teitzara, he wanted to make sure that there'll be a school for all the children, the grandchildren, and for himself. There'll be a place of learning. Laharis. The first thing that he made sure was there will be a yeshiva in Goshen. Verse 29. Vayasa Yosef Makafta, Yosef harnessed his chariot. Vayalikas Yisrael Aviv Goshen. He went to meet his father in Goshen. Vayeda Elav, and he revealed himself to him. Vayipal Atzavarav, and he fell on his neck. Vayep Chatzavarav Eid, and he wept on his neck a long time. So Rasha Yosef harnessed his chariot. He personally harnessed the horses to his chariot to honor his father. Vayeda Elav, and he appeared to him. Yosef Nira Elav, Yosef presented himself to his father. Vayef al Tzavare, a long time. Oid. Oid is an expression of weeping, for expression of profused weeping. Likewise, he placed an additional guilt on his man. Expression of long time. And this is here too, he wept greatly and continuously, more than usual. However, Jacob neither fell on Joseph's neck, nor he kissed him. What was Yaakov Avinu doing? While Yosef was crying and weeping, what was Yaakov Avinu doing? Jacob, so what was he doing? Our sages say that he was reciting the Shema. Yaakov Avinu was busy reciting the Shema. And he was saying the Shema Yisrael. He was crying out to the heaven. Verse 30. Yisrael told Yosef, Musa, now I can die. After I've seen your face, that you're still alive. Shirash, in simple meaning, is the Targum renders, if I should die this time, I'll be consoled. In Midrash interpretation, however, I thought that I would die two deaths, in this world and the next world, because the Shekhinah had left me. And I thought that the Holy One, blessed be He, would hold me responsible for your death. Now that you are still alive, I will die but once. A Musa Hapam, I will only have a physical death, but not a spiritual death. Yosef told his brothers, based off in the house of his father, Ella, Vagida Pare, I'm going to go up, I'm going to tell the Pharaoh, Ramelav, based Avi Ashabetz Canaan, Boelai, my father's house, and everything belonged to him has come to the land of Egypt. But I'm going to tell them that you are shepherds. Because they were men of many flock, with Tzainim and Kadam and all their cattle and their sheep. They brought it from Canaan, they brought it to Mitzrayim. If Pari is going to call you and I'll ask you, if he's going to ask you, what do you do for a living? You shall say, your servants are owners of life. We are shepherds. From our youth, until now. We are shepherds. Our fathers are shepherds. Because I want him to leave you alone. It's Goshen. So you'll stay in the land of Goshen, it won't bother you. Because the shepherds, sheep are the Egyptian god. And he's going to tell you, listen, stay in Goshen, stay out of the metropolis, stay in the suburb. Don't come into the city. People won't see that you're shepherds, and they'll leave you alone. So now she said, which you need Goshen, for it's a land of pasture. And when you tell him that you are not skilled in any other work, he'll send you away from him. He'll say, okay, stay in Goshen, stay in Goshen, enjoy life. Be shepherds. Because the sheep was the god of Egypt. Chapter 47, verse number 1. So Yosef came and told Pare, and he told him, my brothers have come. And their cattle and their sheep, everything that they own, they came from the land of Canaan. And behold, they are in the land of Goshen. He took part of his brothers. He took 5 brothers. He brought them before Pare. So Rashi says, for the most inferior of them, he didn't take the strong ones. He took the weak guys, inferior of them regarding to the physical strength. Those who did not appear to be strong. Because Pharaoh recognized them to be strong, he'd make them warriors. That are following Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yisachar, Minyamin, those whose names Moshe did not double when he blessed them. The names of strong ones he doubled. And these are for Judah. Hear, O Israel, hear, O God, the Lord, the voice of Judah. And regarding God, it said, bless you who granted space for God. And Naphtali, it said, Naphtali wishes which shall be satisfied. And regarding Dan, it says, Dan is like a young lion, and so on, for Zvulun. And for Asher, this quotation is from the Bereshit Rabbah, which are Goda of Eretz Yisrael. In our Babylon time, however, we find that those names of Moshe Rabbeinu double were the weak ones, and those who he brought before Pharaoh. So it's machlek exactly who are the weak ones. As for Judah, the 6th one, whose name is doubled, however, was not doubled because of his weakness, but there is another reason for it. As it stated in Baba Kama and in Bryson Sifri, in V'zois HaBracha, we learned from our Talmud, and the Sifri identifies the 5 brothers, as does the Talmud. Name of the 5 brothers were Gad, Naphtali, Dan, Zevulun, and Asher. And those are the 5 brothers that were brought before the Pharaoh. And Pari asked his brothers, Mama Secha, what is your occupation? Pari said to Pharaoh, saying, we are shepherds. Avadecha, our servants. Gam anachnu, gam avisenu. We were shepherds, and that's our business. He told the Pharaoh, we came to live in the land. Because there's everything is dried out in the land of Canaan. Because the land of Canaan, famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is open before you. The mate of Aretz and the best of the land. Sell your father. Let them dwell in the land of Goshen. But if you know any of your brothers or your grandchildren that are strong men, Samtim son and Mikna, then make them livestock officers over what is mine. So Rashi says, skillful in the occupation of pasturing sheep. Ashali, Tzayin Shali, my sheep. So Yosef brought Yaakov his father, he stood him before the Pharaoh. And Yaakov blessed Paro. So Rashi says that's why he translated greeted Paro. This is a greeting. It's not a blessing, as a customary for all occasionally present itself before monarchs. Say, you do a greeting. So Paro said to Yaakov, how many days are your days of your life? How old are you? Yaakov said, the days of the years of my sojourning is 130 shleishim ashar. I'm 130 years old. The days of my life have been few and miserable. And I've not yet reached the days of the years of the lives of my forefathers, the days of their sojourn. So basically, my life has been 130. I'm not yet holding. My grandfather lived to 175, but my father lived to 180. But my life has not been so happy as of now. So these days of being the days of my being a stranger, all my days I've been a stranger in the land. I've been running and running and running and running. Well, I have not yet reached the life of my parents, l'tova, in goodness. That's, I said, the best years of Yaakov were the last 17 years of his life. He lived to 147 years old. Yaakov blessed Paro, and he left from the face of Pharaoh. So Rashi says, according to the custom of the leaving the presence of the princes, that they bless them and then take the leave. Now, what was the blessing that he blessed him? It doesn't say in the Torah what was the blessing. The Gemara says that the Nile should rise at his approach, because Egypt does not drink rainwater, but the Nile rises and waters it. So Yaakov blessed the Pharaoh that when he went to the Nile should rise. And the second he went to the Nile rise, it gave water to the whole Egypt. So it ended the famine. So since Yaakov's blessing, Pharaoh would come to the Nile and would rise to greet him and water the land. And that's why ultimately he took that, he made himself a god out of that, because he fed the whole Egypt, he said to the Egypt that he brought an end to the famine, the Pharaoh. Meanwhile, it was the blessing of Jacob that when he would come down to the Nile would rise. And that completes the Chumash of today. We now go to the Tanya of the day. Yesterday we started the chapter 6 of Tanya. And the Alter Rebbe is explaining the way things go, just like it is in Kedusha. There's a concept of the opposite of Kedusha, the yin and the yang, so to say, of godliness. And just like the aspect of godliness in the holiness, so too there needs to be the opposite, the challenge of godliness. So what is the concept of the opposite of holiness? So we have good and bad. What is the concept of the opposite of holiness? Is something that's the opposite of godly. Doesn't mean that it's a challenge to godliness. It means it's nothing, even a concept of nothingness. Any speech, any thought, which is not for God, or for the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for the service of God, they are all garments for the animal soul. So I don't have to do something, I don't have to talk bad. I don't have to do something bad. Something that's not for God, for the service of God, is the aspect of the opposite of godliness. This is the meaning, the other side. Literally, Sat Acha. Something that's not for Kedusha, something that's not for holiness is the other side. Now the verse says, In all your ways you shall know God, and all your actions should be for the sake of heaven. That means that everything could be for the sake of heaven. Everything, even the daily work, could be for the sake of heaven. Everything that you do in life could be for the sake of heaven. But I don't have to do everything in life for the sake of heaven. So if I don't do things for the sake of heaven, then basically I'm doing it for the other side. I didn't do anything bad. Nothing bad was done. I didn't do an Aveda, God forbid. I didn't do a sin. Nor did I do a bad thing. But if it's not for the sake of heaven, then it's not for the sake of heaven. So either it's for the sake of heaven, sake of godliness, for the purpose of God's creation in the world, then it's godly, then it's Kedusha. Something that's not Kedusha doesn't mean I did something bad. It's just not Kedusha. It's not for the sake of holiness. So in essence, Chassidus says there are three things, three concepts in the world. There's mitzvah, there's a concept of doing something for God. There's a sin, that's a concept of doing something that is against God. And then there's a reshus, there's in the middle. It's no man's land. It either can be brought to godliness or it can be brought to the other side. So, for example, eating is not a mitzvah to eat. You have to eat because you have to live. It's not an aveda to eat. Sure not. So what is eating? I can either do it for the sake of heaven. I can bring the eating into the realm of holiness, or I can eat for the sake of the body, for totally the sake of the physical. And I can bring it down into holiness. I didn't do a sin by bringing it down to unholiness. I just didn't do it for a holy purpose. That's why the sages instituted a blessing, that we should always make a blessing when we eat. So we should have in mind, it should give us a moment before we take a drink of water and make a bracha. So the bracha would remind us and tell us, my friend, you're drinking the water not only because you're thirsty, you're drinking the water because hopefully this water will give you strength, that you'll be able to serve God. You'll be able to do a mitzvah. You'll be able to do something good with it. That's why you're drinking the water. Not only because you're thirsty, because this will give you strength to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so to everything you're going to eat, you're going to make a bracha. You're going to think a second before you eat the bread, or a second before you eat the tomato, or a second before you eat the steak. You say, wait a second, I can eat this because I'm just hungry, or I'm a gluttonous, I like steak. Or I can eat this Hashem Shemayim, and that's why I made a bracha. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Blessed be God of the heavens who created everything, who created this, the fruits of the God created it. The second I say the bracha, so I'm saying God created. Why am I saying God created? Why I have to say that? Because I have to remember God created for a purpose. He didn't create it for the concept of its physical pleasure. He created everything for Kedusha. We say in Ethics of Our Father, whatever God created, He created for His own glory. He created, what does that mean? He created it for the concept of Kedusha, for the aspect of the spiritual component. And therefore, as a Yid, how do I become a partner with God's creation? Everything God created. So how do I become a partner in God's creation? Is by taking that physical thing and bringing it to Tzad HaKedusha, dragging it to the holy side, doing it l'shem shamayim. If I don't do that, I'm bringing it on the unholy side. Again, I didn't do a sin. I'm just bringing it to the opposite side, the unholy side. So I didn't do a sin. I'm just bringing it to a concept that there's no holiness. It's no purpose. There's no godly purpose. So there's a concept of the God Kedusha, and that's not Kedusha. So what's Kedusha? What is holiness? And if you'll understand what holiness is, you'll automatically understand what unholiness is. Mitzad Kedusha, what is Kedusha? Ein el ashram shot kedusha. The side of holiness is nothing but the indwelling and the extension of God holiness. That's the concept of holiness. Holiness is that the Eibishter can be there. God dwells in it. How does God dwell in it? Now, God dwells only in which is surrenders to Him. When the surrender is an actual one and invisible even in the surrendered being external aspect, in the case which with the supernal angels, whose entire being is constantly and openly surrendered to God. So that is what's called in Kabbalah, bitul memetzias, self-nullification. Here you have the angels that are creations that are totally nullified to God's wishes. And that's their whole purpose. An angel is only a messenger of God. And that's what he's created for. He's not created for anything else. And that's why angels are totally nullified. Or whatever it is a potential surrender. As in the case of every Jew here below, in the physical world, that he has the capacity. Lias bottom mamish. Everybody has the capacity to nullify themselves. Every Jew has the capacity to give his life up for God. And we saw that throughout history. That Jews were ready to give their life up to God. Why? Because we nullify ourselves to God. Every Jew has a natural love of God. Every Jew has a natural desire to be part of godliness. Because that's within our capability. So as explained further in Tanya, going to the explanation over here, every Jew has the capacity of self-sacrifice in the face of an attempt to coerce him forsake Judaism. He's willing to suffer hatred. Every Jew throughout history. Thus, every Jew possesses internally within his soul the potential to surrender to God. Whatever his external state is, he could be even a sinner. Nevertheless, you're going to push him to the corner. He's ready to give himself up to God. What happened? What happened? How is it possible that a Jew that was a sinner never did a mitzvah, suddenly you're going to put him there? Are you Jew or not a Jew? He's ready to give his life up to God. Because every Jew has a neshama. And that neshama gives him that capability of self-sacrifice. This potential, however, may reveal itself only in the act of matronhood. What happens the whole day, every day? Because he is surrendered to God, God's holiness rests upon him. That's why it says in Ethics of Our Fathers that even one who's sitting and learning Torah, Shechina Shruya, the presence of God rests upon him. For when one engages in the Torah study, he surrenders to godness and emerges to affect him on a revealed external level. Since such study entails setting aside one's own notions and presumptions in order to understand the concept of God's wisdom, and will express as expressed in the Torah. So in essence, if you really want to learn, if one really wants to learn, he needs to put himself aside. He needs to put himself aside. He needs to put himself, his own intellect aside. He needs to put himself, he really wants to learn. He needs to put aside all his preconceived understandings of Torah he needs to put this all aside, because if he's not going to be able to put it all aside, he'll never be able to learn. So if a person really wants to learn, he needs to mevatel himself. He needs to nullify himself. He has to put himself aside. That's already a concept of self-nullification, of bittul. Putting yourself aside. Because if you're going to come to the subject with preconceived your own imagination, or your already questions and your doubts and all everything that I have, I'm going to come and learn with all the questions. I'll never learn anything. If I really want to learn, I have to come with an open mind. Especially when you want to come and learn Torah. You have to come with an open mind. You have to put everything aside. You have to say, I'm coming to learn the subject. And that's the beauty. That's why it says, if I put myself aside, even one person puts himself aside, the Eibishter is there. God comes within him. If I have the capability to put myself aside, then I have God within me. That's what the expression they say that the Kotzker Rebbe once said, they asked him as a child, where is God? And his answer was, will you let him in? God is not a pushy. He doesn't push himself in places that people don't want him. You don't want him, you don't have to have him. If a person really wants the Eibishter, he needs to make space for God. He needs to make space. How does one make space? Is by putting oneself aside. That's the way it is done. And on each gathering of 10 Jews, the presence of God rests as always. So when 10 Jews come together, whether it's for a minyan or 10 Jews come together and learn Torah together, the 10 Jews form a congregation of Israel. That's called a congregation, which is fit for both the divine presence. That means 10 Jews come together. Automatically, that shows on a concept of bittul. We're coming together as a congregation. The word congregation or community is automatically bittul, right? Because every person has to put themselves aside. If you want to be a community that works together, every person needs to put himself aside. If every person is going to say, no, I am the community, and the community needs to be me, you're going to have 10 people killing each other. You need to put yourself aside to have a group. That's Kedusha. Kedusha is space for God. That's the simple meaning. Kedusha is space for God. The Eibishter wants to be part of the situation. For God to be part of a situation, you need to make space for it. God doesn't want to change. Doesn't make you different. He doesn't want you to become somebody else. He wants to be with you. He wants to be part of your existence. If in my existence, I'm going to make space for him, he'll be part of my existence. I have no space for him, then I have no space for him. That's Kedusha. Kedusha means space. The opposite of Kedusha means no space. I have no space. That's why marriage is called, in the Torah, marriage is called Kiddushin, holiness. Because true marriage is space. I have space for somebody else. It's not about me. It's about the person that I'm marrying. I have space for her. And a true marriage is that person has space in every aspect of marriage. In every aspect. Not only physically, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually. Marriage is a full component. That's why even Shlomo Melech compares the relationship with God to marriage. Because marriage is in every facet of your life. There is space. Imagine if you only had marriage space financially, but not physically. Only had space physically, but not emotionally. It wouldn't be a happy marriage. In a relationship with God, is the same concept. I need to have space for him in every aspect of my life. In eating, in sleeping, in learning, in walking, in talking. In all my ways, I know God. I go with God in all aspects of my life. That's the beauty of a relationship. That I have space. That's Kedusha. Kedusha is space. I have space. The opposite of Kedusha, there's no space. It's all about me. No space. I'm not doing anything wrong. If I do something wrong when it's about me, nothing wrong about me. I'm not a bad guy. But it's about me. And I don't have space for you right now. I need my own space. That is the opposite of Kedusha. Therefore, anything that does not surrender itself, does not give space to God, I have no space, I'm my own entity, it doesn't receive godliness, doesn't have holiness. That's it. That's why the Gemara says, the expression in the Gemara, the Rebbe says, I can live with everybody besides a person who's egotistical. I can't live with somebody who has no space. He's a yesh, he's a selfish person that has no space. So here, in essence, God says, I can live with a sinner, I can live with anybody as long as he has some space. Some space for me. That's this concept. So in Chassidus, Tov Ra really is selflessness and selfishness. If I can have the capacity for selflessness, I have kedusha. If I have no capacity for selflessness, I am a selfish person. I can be a very good person. I can be doing everything good. I cannot do one sin. If I'm selfish, I have no kedusha. So I can do Torah mitzvahs not for holiness, just for that. So I was brought up that way, or I do it because I'm afraid of my grandmother. I don't know. So I do it not because of God. It has nothing to do with God. So that's kedusha. You have an example. You're coming into Shabbos. Zochar Hashem Shabbos lekatshoi. Torah says, remember the day of Shabbos to make it holy. It's not only about what you do and you don't do. It's about kedusha. It's about bringing God in Shabbos. Day of Shabbos is about God, right? That I stop doing something and I do godly things. I connect to God. That is kedusha. So it's not about do's and the don'ts. It's about the importance of holiness. It's about making space for God in the week. And that's the beauty. But where else would we receive its vitality? Godness and holiness is a source of vitality for every existing being. As it says, you give life to them all. So how is it possible to live without holiness? Alter Rebbe goes on to qualify in his previous remark, stating that those beings which do not surrender themselves to God receive the vitality only from a superficial, external level of godliness. And from this level too, only when it descends degree by degree through numerous contractions of life force. So we don't. That's why again we say, like the blessing of the Kohen, we say Yisa Hashem panav elecha. May God show His face to you. We are looking for a face-to-face relationship. That's when we do kedusha. When we try to bring holiness, when we make space for God in everything that we do, then we have a face-to-face relationship in all aspects of life. But if we don't do it that way, we're still alive. We have a back-to-back relationship. Or my front to his back, whatever. We don't have a face-to-face relationship. Pnimis kedusha. From pnimis, from the face. That's why pnimis is essence. Oh, same word as face. When one has a face-to-face, you can look at each other's eyes. When two people can look at each other, sometimes you cannot look at the other person. It's difficult to look at face-to-face because we know something is not good in the relationship. So we can't face-to-face each other. We talk behind each other's backs. We talk to each other while we can't look at each other. It might have a relationship. That's not an inner relationship. That's why face, panim, and pnimius, inner relation. An inner relationship is a face-to-face relationship. Pnimius kedusha ma'usam atzmusa b'chveda ba'atzmei. The inner aspect of holiness, from its essence, core. How does one receive? Elam bin chinas acharayim. When one doesn't have a face-to-face, he has like a backside relationship. So the bestow to bestow from one's pnimis, literally from one's face, means, as explained in chapter 22, is to give with a pleasurable will and desire. Acharayim, literally behind one's back, means to bestow without a desire or pleasure out of some extenuating factor. The giver's attitude will be apparent. In either case, in his manner of giving, if he gives something to an enemy, for example, he will avert his face from him. For one's face represents his inner feelings. Since the giver's heart is not in his gift, he turns his face away, presenting his enemy with his back. Thus, pnimiut and acharayim, the inner and the outer, in the sense of internal and external aspect of one's will, are related to the literary meaning of face and rear. So the Alter Rebbe says, in essence, that's what Kabbalah says, pnimis and acharayim, the inner and external, is connected to reality. To reality, that when I have an inner relationship with somebody else, I face to face him. When I have external, I have to give the guy something, whatever, I have to give it because of external reasons, it's called acharayim, backside, external. Chitzonius, an outer expression, not an inner expression. We are looking for an inner expression. We're not looking for an outer expression. Because an outer expression doesn't come from the essence. And that's the difference. I can receive my relationship with God from essence to essence, or I can receive my relationship to God from a very low expression of godliness. That means God has to come from level to level to level, and ultimately I can receive from the lowest level of godliness. That this limited form of life force reaches to klippos by descending degree by degree through myriads of levels in the chain-like descent of the worlds in a manner of cause and effect. V'tzimtzumim rabim, and the vitality that ascends through many tzimtzumim, which is contractions. And this process diminishes the vitality to the point where it's incomparably lower than its original state. So greatly diminished does the light and life force become. The mution after the mution, until it's able to become contracted and clothed in a manner of exile. Meaning that instead of being surrendered to divine life force, the object in which vitality is clothed masters it. As for example, a captive in exile is mastered by his captors. And that's the secret of Golus. That's what Golus is. That's what exile is. Exile is that God is in exile. True concept of exile is not that we are in exile, is that God is in exile. We are in darkness, is self-understood. That God is in darkness. God is giving a life force to something that's totally the opposite from him. He is a great exile of this divine light. That God can come into something that is totally surrendered from him, that is totally the opposite of him. God can come into something that is totally against him. The is to give it its life force, to give it its life force, and to make sure that this thing that's the opposite of him doesn't disappear. This is unbelievable. The Eibusha does that, but that is Golus. That is a true aspect of exile. True aspect of exile is God's exile. That God continues to give vitality to things that are opposite of him, that maybe are totally against him. But he does that. That it should not return to its original state of non-existence. As if they were before created by the vitality clothed within it. In brief, all that is not surrendered to God, but considers itself a separate from him, receives its vitality from a charayim of godliness by the ways of numerous descents of various contractions. That the divine life force is concealed within them in a state of exile. Thus, it belongs to the realm of klippa. Klippa means a covering. So now the covering is the most important thing. The covering covers over, doesn't let the what's in it to be revealed. That's real gullus. Ultimately, could be real gullus. That exile, that the covering does not allow the spark to be revealed. And we can go through life without revealing the spark of godliness. It is now clear why any thought, word, or action not directed towards serving God, hence not surrendering to godliness, is a garment of the animal soul that is derived from klippa. Even if that thought, word, or deed is not actually evil. See, that's where we fall into the trap. And we think that since it's not evil, that's how we become trapped into klippa. See, the klippa, the other side is trying to say, no, we're not doing anything wrong. Who did a sin? Nobody got hurt. Everything is fine. That's how we translate good and evil. Good and evil is translated by us, and we do it specifically in that way so that the Yetzer Hara puts us into this trap that we have decided that good and evil is a concept when somebody gets hurt. That's as long as nobody gets hurt. Two adults doing something, nobody got hurt, it's all fine. That's not the Kedusha. That's not good and evil in the Torah. Good and evil in the Torah starts off from a thought that has no purpose. Is already doing the opposite of holiness. And the more we get entrapped into selfishness, and the more we get away from selflessness, the more we don't have a relationship with each other, and the more we don't have a relationship with God. And ultimately, selfishness will turn into evil. And it turns into evil pretty quickly. But if we started off with the root, that's why Chassidus tells us, why wait for the sin? Find the core of the sin. The core of the sin is selfishness. That's the core of the ego. The core of the sin is doing something not for the sake of God. That's the core of everything. If we could go to the core of everything and not deal with the sin itself, never do a sin. Nobody should ever do a sin. Not in thought, not in speech, and not in action. Nobody should ever do a sin. But nobody should ever even surrender himself to the klippa, to sitra achra. Nobody should also surrender himself to do things without connecting something of it to holiness. To be able to even connect it to holiness is already a concept of not a holy thing. A Jew should be able to connect everything he does in his life to something holy, to something godly. That's the meaning of the verse. B'chol derachecha, in all your ways you should know him. B'chol masecha, and all your actions should be a little bit l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven. So then you'll never come to do a sin. You won't have to even, you'll never come to do a sin. Forget about that. Will be out of the realm of things. Who would ever come to sin if every thought of mine I try to have is connected to something godly, and if it's going to be connected to something that's the opposite of godliness, I'm going to push it away. I'm going to challenge it. I'm going to fight it. So that is the whole Tanya. That's the struggle. The struggle. See, we should never come to struggle to do a negative thing. We should struggle with the mind. That should be where the struggle is. The second the struggle's out of the mind, then we have problems. When the struggle's in our action, when the struggle's in our speech, then we got problems. if we always keep the struggle in the mind, when we start struggling, should I think about it? Should I put God? Does God belong here? Doesn't God belong here? How do I bring God into it? Then I would never come to an evil speech, because the struggle will end in the mind. Hopefully God will win. The godliness will win. So the struggle will never come out in speech. And surely the struggle will never come out in action, because it's going to always stay in the mind. And God will win in the mind, hopefully. More learning, God will win in the mind. And that's where it all starts. So it ends with the action, but it starts in the mind. And that's where we need to keep the struggle, and that's where we should struggle. And we'll always struggle, because we'll always have a nefesh habahamis that always wants to think about self. And I'll translate it. That's all about, no, you didn't do anything wrong. Nobody did anything wrong. Nobody was hurt. Everything is wonderful. But ultimately, the more I do things that are not for God, I become selfish and more selfish. And ultimately, the selfishness will translate into me saying something wrong, and ultimately, chas v'shalom, into me doing something wrong. That completes the Tanya of the day. Today is the 6th day of the month of Tevis, the 6th of Tevis today, and the Tillim of the day is chapter 35, 36, 37, 38. So 35 to 38, and you would do the chitas of the day. Tomorrow is Shabbos, and you're gonna have to learn chitas on your own, and continue to learn the chitas of the day, learn the chumash and the Tanya of the day. And the Mitzvah on Sunday, we will come together with the new parsha, the last parsha in the book of Genesis, Vayechi, and continue with the Tanya of the day. I wish you all a wonderful and beautiful Shabbos, a happy Shabbos, a healthy Shabbos, and a wonderful Shabbos, and Shabbat Shalom.